Sony announced last week that starting in March of 2019, they would no longer be supporting the PlayStation 3 and the PlayStation Vita as part of their free games lineup every month for PlayStation Plus, and would continue to solely focus on the PS4. And with that announcement, Sony has seemingly placed the final nail in the Vita's coffin, at least as far as they are concerned. But for me and the ever-passionate Vita community, the Vita lives on. So today I'm going to talk about why I love the Vita and why you should too. Roll the intro. So to start off, yes, the Vita hasn't really sold well. Obviously that's why they're pretty much killing it off. Now, why didn't it sell well? Maybe it was a marketing thing, maybe it's because it looks too similar to the PSP, so there was some confusion, like there was confusion with the Wii U and the Wii. And yes, they totally probably shot themselves in the foot with things like the proprietary charging cable in the original models of the Vita, as well as the proprietary and super expensive memory cards. Honestly, I only have a 16GB memory card in this thing, and I want a 32GB, but I am not going to pay $60 for a 32GB memory card. That's as much as a full retail game. That's more expensive than a Vita game. Honestly, as far as why the Vita didn't sell, I don't really know if there are other factors other than maybe just the competition from the Nintendo and the DS and the 3DS at the time. I really do think maybe the memory card thing was a big factor in that. And honestly, if they fully abandon the Vita and do not drop the prices of the memory cards, I will call the police because that is just criminal. Now, I don't really care about the PS3 anymore, honestly, mine's not even plugged in anymore, but as far as the Vita, with no games being offered anymore on PlayStation Plus, it's becoming even harder for me to personally justify paying for PlayStation Plus, especially when I was already kind of on the fence about it. Now, admittedly, the PlayStation Plus selections for Vita games hasn't been super great, but there have been some standout titles. Over the past year or so, we've seen games like Severed, Psycho Pass Mandatory Happiness, Day of the Tentacle Remastered, and even Grand Kingdom last month, all of which are pretty good standout titles, all available for free with your PlayStation Plus membership. Now, as far as why I love the Vita, there's actually a lot of reasons. One, I mean, just the design alone, especially of these older OLED models. I know people like the thinner models. I don't mind this one at all. I prefer the thicker model, but you've got the fake metal looking ring around it, and then the white model is just so beautiful. I really love the design of it, and it's just comfortable to hold. It's got a great selection of games, and that's what I'm really going to talk about today, is the games. Because what good is a gaming system without a selection of games? Xbox One? Now, a lot of people say that the Vita is dead. That's one thing you'll constantly hear is Vita is dead, but honestly, the Vita is not. The Vita still has games coming out. It's just that a lot of the AAA games aren't coming out anymore. And if that's your thing, then maybe, yeah, the Vita is not for you. If you're here looking for AAA games, you'll probably find a couple, but not a lot. But there are some really good, standout, solid Vita games. You've got an Uncharted game that's pretty good. You've got a Killzone game, I think, somewhere. I don't know, I mostly play the Vita for Japanese games and indie games, but I'm pretty sure there's a Killzone game. Speaking of Japanese games, you have Persona 4, which is regarded by many to be one of the best, if not the best, Vita game available. And if you've seen my top 5 JRPGs video, you know this one is my number one. Spoiler for that video, check it out if you want. And yeah, admittedly, a lot of these games are available on other systems now. I mean, Persona 4 Golden specifically is still not available on anything other than the Vita. But then you have the Danganronpa series, which is now available on PC and the PS4. And then you have games like Ys 8 Lacrimosa of Dana, which is available on the PS4 and is coming to the Switch in the summer, but it's $20 less for the Vita version and you get basically the same game. Now in cases like Ys 8, which came out on the PS4 and the Vita at the same time, you are also getting games that are being ported to PS4, PC, or even the Switch that were originally on the Vita, like the Danganronpa series. Technically, that was originally on PSP, but in America, originally on the Vita. But anyway, a lot of those games are being ported, but I don't see any other system that has Freedom Wars, do you? Next question. Seriously though, Freedom Wars is one of the best games on the Vita, and it is an exclusive as of right now, so pick that up. It's like $5. Get a Vita, get this, you've got hours of gameplay time, you don't even need a memory card yet if this is all you're gonna play. Now, one thing that turns some people off to the Vita, but maybe it won't turn you off, is the abundance of Japanese games. Now, admittedly, there are a lot of Japanese games out there that I personally wouldn't buy on the Vita, like, you know, but I'm not really talking about those. I'm talking about games like Persona 4 and Freedom Wars and God Eater. A lot of these games, Danganronpa, those are all great Japanese games that have been translated to English and sold and published here in America, and they're fantastic. They're some of the best games on the Vita, in my opinion, and a lot of people would agree that at least Danganronpa and Persona and Freedom Wars are really just up there as far as Vita games would go. Of course, the Vita is a great place to play lots and lots of indie games, and while admittedly most if not all of these indie games are available on other platforms, I personally, as well as a lot of other people I've seen, really prefer to play a lot of these indie games on a handheld. And now while the Switch does have a lot of these games available, they're probably either more expensive or they're just not ported over yet, where the Vita's indie catalog is just huge in comparison. And the great thing is you get cross-buy with a lot of them, as well as cross-save, so you can continue— excuse me! Background? I'm speaking here. Anyway, a lot of these Vita games are cross-buy and cross-save, so you can seamlessly go back and forth between playing on your TV and playing on a handheld. Maybe not as seamlessly as on the Switch, but you know, just saying. You've got all the classic indie games like Shovel Knight, Super Meat Boy, SteamWorld Dig, Rogue Legacy, Guacamelee, Don't Starve, tons of these great games that are all, I think, all cross-buy, and they're just there in your hand, and that's just to name a few of the older indie games where you have new ones coming out all the time. Speaking of indie games, if you're like me and you like collecting physical games, especially for the Vita because of the cute little cases they come in, companies like Limited Run Games, Fangamer, and Signature Edition Games are constantly bringing out physical editions of games that would normally only be available via download, so you can then purchase those games physically to take up less space on your memory card and have there on your game shelf as part of your beautiful Vita collection. Admittedly, Limited Run Games is a bit more of a headache with their very limited stock and high demand for most of the games they release, but if you can get your hands on one without going through an eBay scalper, it really is awesome. In fact, I got my first limited run game just a couple weeks ago with Oddworld Munch's Odyssey for the Vita, and I even got this copy of Shovel Knight for the Vita, which was made exclusively by Fangamer for the Vita, who also makes a physical copy of Undertale for the Vita and PS4. Going back to Japanese games for a second, if you're not opposed to importing, the Vita is completely region-free, so you can import games from Japan, Europe, etc. PlayAsia.com is a great place to get a hold of some of these games. Games like Gundam Breaker 2, Gundam Breaker 3 actually does have English subtitles available if you buy it on PlayAsia, and then Phantasy Star Nova, and then these two games are actually pretty cheap. I got this I think for $13 on Amazon, and it's simple, fun, something you can enjoy on the go. And then you have even special cases like Dragon Quest Builders. This is an English subtitled Asian copy that I got from PlayAsia for about the same price as the actual game, whereas here in America we only got a downloadable version of this game for the Vita. Now, if everything I've said up till now sounds good but doesn't quite convince you that the Vita is worth it in this day and age, then let me tell you about some old games. PS1 and PSP games are available to buy on PSN, and while the PS1 games can be played on a PS3, the PSP. Wow. Hey, you guys hungry? Maybe go grab me a PSP with some falafel? PSP classics are only available to play on a PSP itself or a PS Vita, and while admittedly a PSP may be the cheaper option to go, just buy it, okay? Like I said earlier, I don't have my PS3 plugged in anymore, so being able to play PS1 games on the Vita is great. Nothing quite says freedom like playing Legend of Dragoon, Tekken, I don't know, Klonoa, all while taking a dump. But in all seriousness, there are tons of great classic games that you can download for really cheap on the Vita. Just on here alone, I have Final Fantasy VIII, Final Fantasy VI, Breath of Fire 4, Legend of Dragoon, Xenogears is here somewhere. And that's just JRPGs. That's hours and hours and hours of JRPG goodness all in this little thing. But there are tons and tons of other PS1 classics you can download. Crash Bandicoot, not really. Spyro, I don't think so. But there's tons of good stuff out there, okay? PS1 was more than Crash and Spyro. I've only recently been digging into the PSP's vast library. If you've seen my JRPG video, you know a bit more about that. And while admittedly some of the best PSP games are still only available physically, like Crisis Core and Star Ocean, a lot of the PSP's greatest games are available, probably for cheaper than you can buy them physically, on PSN. With great PSP games like Metal Gear Solid Peace Walker, Valkyria Chronicles 2, and Legend of Heroes Trails in the Sky, you have got tons and tons of hours worth of gameplay, all available to download on PSN. So that is the Vita and why I love it all in a nutshell. Probably not the most well-worded or constructed argument, but I did what I could, okay? So I'd really love to hear from you in the comments below, whether you have a Vita or had a Vita or want a Vita, any knowledge or experience or anything you want to say about the Vita. Feel free to let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you. I'm always down to hear about some good old Vita lovin'. I'm gonna end this video.